Woody Johnson has spoken out against Zach Wilson, his coaching staff, and front office. We're going to dissect all of that, including the 2024 Hall of Fame class. Did the committee get all of the nominees correct? We're going to dissect that all on another edition, a morning edition of Football with Faria.
It's time for Football with Faria.
You got to get the offense right, and you got to be able to be aggressive. They put up 14 against the secondary. That is driving me up a freaking wall right now.
Now here's your host, Nick Faria.
All right, so welcome back inside Football with Faria. It's a morning edition, and there's really only one reason why we're doing a morning edition. First off, I have to get up early. My wife goes out the door. She has an actual full-time job, so I try to help her out with her morning tasks. And normally I'm not in the mood to talk football this early in the morning, but clearly some things change because of what happened last night, NFL Honors Night. Congratulations to Lamar Jackson for winning his second NFL MVP. I think everyone kind of expected that. Cam Hayward winning Walter Payton Man of the Year. A truly fantastic person and a fantastic award. Congratulations to him and his family. I said it last night. I think the Hayward family is a very underrated football family in NFL history. You get the Mannings, the Kelseys, the Longs. You have those kind of families that are just synonymous with football history. And I think the Haywards have to be in that conversation as well. Ironhead Hayward, the really one of the first true power backs in the modern game going into the 80s with the Saints. He's got multiple children now in the NFL, and Hayward obviously the best. I don't know if he's going to be a Hall of Famer, but he's certainly on that stratosphere, that trajectory, where if he doesn't get in the first couple of rounds, he certainly could get in later on. Just a tremendous moment for him, his family, the Hayward family, and for football families everywhere. We're all connected as football fans, but when you have a son or a daughter, then you played the game that continues to play. That's your legacy when it comes to football, whether it's high school, whether it's college, whether it's just Pop Warner. There's a legacy of football fandom and football players, and I think in a lot of families now, with this game. So I think all of that needs to be taken into account. And congratulations on a really nice NFL Honors Night. But we have to get to the biggest takeaways today, and that's Woody Johnson. An impromptu presser, if you will, spoke to a couple of reporters at NFL Honors Night, and he said a lot. I mean, we were all said. I'm looking at the comments here. You guys got a question, you guys want to call in, do so. We're going to be free for about an hour. We're going to be talking about Woody, where the Jets go from here. Are the Jets dead on arrival for 2024? We're going to dissect all of that here today. So give the questions up from Obi really quick because it's not really a football question. Is that a Hofstra cap? Yes, it is. I graduated 2019. I'm a graduate of Hofstra University, majored in journalism, was at RHU for 4 years. But let's get to business, right? Woody Johnson speaks out against his organization, really against everyone in his organization, coming out saying the people that he's spoken to know just how mad he is regarding the 7-10 finish from the 2023 season, essentially saying that this is it. He doesn't want to put a playoff mandate on any particular year, but this is a playoff mandate. And that's kind of what you heard. It's kind of what everyone was expecting. Everyone knows that when we're dissecting and judging the New York Jets 2024 season, the only thing that's going to matter is if they make the playoffs or not. Because it may not even be enough to save Robert Saleh's job. It may not be enough to save Joe Douglas's job. But if the Jets can get to the playoffs in 2024 and win a playoff game, maybe win 2 playoff games, get to the conference championship, now the conversation is, okay, we've got the right people in place. They needed the quarterback. That's obvious. So let's continue to build a competent contender. And I think where the Jets are right now, are they in true title contention? Of course not. I think everyone and their mother agrees that they're not where they need to be in order to be in the Super Bowl. This conversation of Super Bowl contenders, I think there's maybe 2-3 teams in the AFC tops that have that conversation. And I think there are 3 teams in the NFC that have that conversation. So it's a very small group that the Jets are trying to be a part of. And they need to knock this offseason out of the park, which is what Woody Johnson kind of said. There's nothing different about anything. There's no real disagreement. He's pissed off for a rightful reason. They haven't made the playoffs in 13 years, and he's the owner. Granted, he may not have been around for that entire time, but he is still the head honcho. He is still the guy that makes the final decision. And if he's pissed off, it's a clear sign that both Saleh, Douglas, and pretty much every major player in this office, in the front office at One Jets Drive, is going to start the season on the hot seat. It's just plain and simple. It's if you're an owner and you haven't made the playoffs for this long, it's the longest drought in North American sports. Everyone has a right to be pissed off. Robert Saleh has essentially said the same thing. I agree with everyone. Everyone has a right to be pissed off. We haven't been good. You finished 7-10 last year with a roster that was seemingly good enough to make the playoffs. If you were good enough to go 7-10 without a franchise quarterback, then you have a couple of games here and there that are judged based on things that don't have to do with the quarterback. This is kind of my point. And we're going to get to Zach Wilson and his comments with Zach in a little bit. I know some people are already asking. Again, Football with Faria. If you guys have a question, you guys want to call in, the link on YouTube is in the description below. But a comment from Johnny. I'm glad Woody said what he said. We must win games and make the playoffs next year. I don't think anyone would disagree with that comment. I don't think anyone disagreed with a majority of what Woody Johnson said yesterday. Because when you miss the playoffs in the manner that they did last year, or the manner they did 2 years ago, when they started 7-3, 7-4, and lost their final 6 games, that was inexcusable. You can't lose your final 6 games and not score a touchdown in the final 3. It can't happen. And the fact that the offense was so bad in the final weeks, and a lot of people chalk that up to Zach Wilson, I think kind of misses the part in a lot of different cases, because as great as this Jets defense has been, they are susceptible at times. They can get beat at times. And if you are a historical defense like they want to be, you got to be historical. You got to hold teams to under 13 points every game. If you're talking about historical. And that's what they were talking about at the beginning of the year. They thought they were good enough in 2023 to be a historical defense. And again, this isn't to say that the defense deserves the most blame. I'm giving one example. But the problem with the Jets is not just, they've missed on the quarterback. It's a number of different factors. I've talked about it so many times since this podcast started. The GM deserves a lot of blame for last season. The moves he didn't make deserve criticism. Not going after a backup quarterback, not solidifying the wide receiver position group after Corey Davis retired, not addressing backup quarterback after Aaron Rodgers got hurt. And of course, not addressing the offensive line when they were decimated early in the year. And it just got progressively worse. The GM has his place in that and placed in the blame. The coaching staff has blame to be placed on, because as difficult a situation as Robert Saleh was dealt, and he was dealt a difficult situation, we can argue back and forth about his viability as a head coach, but there's not many head coaches in the NFL objectively that can succeed when your franchise quarterback, who's taken all the first team reps during training camp, goes down 4 plays into week 1. It's very, very difficult to do anything to save that kind of year. And people will look at it and say, well, Bill Belichick did it in 2008 when Tom Brady went down, first quarter against Kansas City? But the one thing that we kind of forget about that Patriots team in 2008, they finished 11-5. Why did they finish 11-5? Well, you had, let's see, I'm trying to think. The Bills were atrocious that year. The division was really good. Miami, the Jets, they all finished relatively close to a playoff spot. But you couldn't beat some of the contending teams, and you had Randy Moss, Hall of Famer, Wes Welker, one of the best slot receivers of all time, an offensive line that was still strong, a defense that at times showed their age, but was still a top 5 defense that year. So there's a reason why the Patriots in 2008 were still able to finish above 500, even with Tom Brady going down for the year. It wasn't just the quarterback. The team was still a historical team. They hadn't lost for a full year. There was a reason why the Patriots were able to pull that off. The Jets weren't going to be able to do that this year. If they finished 9-8 and had a winning season, the argument completely shifts. Well, if we had Rodgers, we win 1 or 2 more games, but we're on the right path. We keep improving the win total. And I think improving the win total would have helped Saleh's case even more. Doubling down on a 7-10 year isn't good. It was enough to keep their jobs, but it wasn't good. They finished 8-9, 9-8. I think every Jet fan here, and let me know, guys. Let me know if I'm talking out of my ass here, but if they finish 8-9, 9-8, and they improve their win total, I think the conversation changes. Because at least they're improving the win total. You see the trajectory. Right now, they're stagnant, and you never want to see stagnation in the NFL. You never want to see it. So obviously, Robert Saleh and his coaching staff have a lot to blame. Obviously, the quarterback has a part to blame because Zach Wilson was still taken with the 2nd overall pick. And there was enough talent here to succeed. Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, Tyler Conklin. You've got 3 weapons right there. There are some teams that were far more successful this year without the quality of weapons that the Jets had. They had answers at quarterback, they had answers at coach, but they were still able to move the ball down the field consistently, unlike what the Jets did. So the quarterback deserves part of the blame. The offensive line deserves part of the blame, although I think we all can agree they were decimated with injuries. It's not so much what they didn't do, it's more what happened to them. But through all of this, we're putting blame here, there, the players, the coaches, the executives, all that deserves blame. But when are we going to bring up Woody Johnson in terms of blame for him? No one disagrees with what he said. Next year is a win-now situation. They must win. They must get to the playoffs. Everyone agrees with that. But when are we going to start pointing the finger at the owner for some of the things he didn't do in 2023? Some of the comments that he made yesterday, really the big one, was the hit on Zach Wilson. He essentially said, we need a backup quarterback. We didn't have one last year. When you have an owner saying that, what does that tell you? They're essentially saying for the 2nd straight year, our season was derailed because of Zach Wilson. That's essentially what it is. The owner of the New York Jets, one of the richest men in the NFL, said our season was derailed essentially because we didn't have a backup quarterback, a competent one. Does a backup quarterback save you from losing 30-0 against the Miami Dolphins in South Florida? Does it save you and beat the Miami Dolphins again on your home turf when you got blown out? How about the Bills in Buffalo? There are some games this year where it didn't matter if you had a backup quarterback or not. You still weren't going to win because the team just wasn't good enough. And there's one discussion I do want to bring up when it comes to Zach Wilson, because it was as strong a comment as you could ever have from Woody Johnson. Him saying those things about Zach Wilson were extremely, extremely strong to essentially say, listen, I'm going to protect our coaches, I'm going to protect our GM for another year because there were circumstances beyond their control. Aaron Rodgers, he said, it's like getting a limb cut off. And I think every Jets fan can relate to that. But there was also a report back in September, if you guys want to take the time machine, go back to week 2. The Jets were preparing for a game against the Dallas Cowboys. They were 1-0. They were hoping to still make the playoffs with Zach Wilson at quarterback because they felt that he improved enough to be a couple wins better than last season. He clearly wasn't. But the report from Josina Anderson said that the Jets were not going to make a big signing at quarterback while Aaron Rodgers recovers from his Achilles injury because Woody Johnson doesn't want to make another payment at the quarterback position. Remember, guys, this is what I said back when it happened. Salary cap is not the same thing as contract money given out. The Jets dished out more money than almost every other team this year to their roster. Kind of like how some teams in baseball, they have a certain luxury tax they don't want to cross. There's no team is given a free budget to say, do whatever you need to do to build a winner. That was kind of what happened here, based on the report from Josina Anderson. Woody Johnson said, I don't want to pay another quarterback. We're already paying enough with Aaron. We're already paying enough with Zach. Let's just run with what we got and see how far you can go. We all know you guys are safe. So long as you don't finish 3-14, you guys are going to be safe. So just do the best you can with what you got. And that fundamentally changes the conversation. Because if Woody Johnson, if we are to believe Josina Anderson's report, and there's no reason why we should think that Josina Anderson is wrong with her report back in September. But if Josina Anderson is correct, and her statement on Woody Johnson did not want to pay for another quarterback, what does that tell you? It tells you that some of the blame, if not most of the blame for last year, falls at the owner. He didn't want to go all in. He didn't feel it was necessary to go all in. Is that the kind of person you want, Jets fans? And I'm not saying that Woody Johnson should sell the team. That's not what I'm saying. But they seemingly went all in when they brought in Aaron Rodgers last offseason. It was the move that they said, we are all in. Let's do this. And then they didn't address the tackle position. And then they didn't address Corey Davis's retirement. And then they didn't address the backup quarterback position. They had 1 foot in, 1 foot out the entire year. They went all in enough to be in the conversation, but they didn't want to go the extra mile, which is fine. That's his money. He can make that choice. But if we're going to look at blame of the issues that Joe Douglas had, not addressing the backup quarterback, not addressing receiver, not addressing the offensive line, all those small issues that continue to creep up each and every week of the season that everyone blames Joe Douglas for, and I am someone that blames Joe Douglas a lot for this mess. But if Douglas wasn't the one to make the decision on the backup quarterback, how do you blame him for that? How can you blame Robert Saleh for that? To be quite honest, I thought his comments, Woody Johnson's comments towards Zach Wilson yesterday, I thought they were overkill. Cup fell. I thought they were overkill. When you have an owner, everyone knows Zach Wilson's gone. Whether by release, whether by trade, Zach Wilson has played his last game as a New York Jet. The last game. Everyone knows it. They're not bringing him back next year. The contract is too much. You get whatever you can in the trade market, whether it's a 7 or a 6, and you move on. Everyone knows it. So what is Woody doing throwing him under the bus again? Everyone knows the quarterback position was the problem. What it does is it highlights his own deficiencies as an owner. Okay, you know you didn't have a backup quarterback. You knew all these issues. Why didn't you allow the front office to make a decision? Why didn't you? There were guys out there. Carson Wentz was available. And we can argue about how good Carson Wentz is. Carson Wentz at one point was the best quarterback in the National Football League. Is he the same player? No. Is he better than Zach Wilson? Yes. He was the best backup, but no one wanted him because of locker room issues. But if you believe that Robert Saleh is a player's coach, then that shouldn't be a problem. It shouldn't. Go get a quality backup. And they didn't. They waited 2 weeks to sign Trevor Siemian, and he didn't see the field until December. What does that tell you? That doesn't tell me that the front office, well, actually, yes, it does tell me that the front office didn't do their due diligence. But then we have to ask ourselves, why didn't they do their due diligence? Why didn't they make a move? And clearly, based on Josina Anderson's reporting from September, they were told not to. I don't want to spend any more money than we already have. We're already paying the second most money to a roster this year. I think Philadelphia was first. One of the contending teams was. But think about that. Think about the money that's been dished out by the Jets this past season. Woody Johnson saying, okay, too far. With the backup quarterback position, sunk this team. If you have Carson Wentz, do they beat the Atlanta Falcons? I think so. Carson just needed to put up 17 points. Do they beat this New England Patriots team? I certainly think so. I think there's a chance they do that. There were so many examples this year of 1 or 2 wins that you just needed competent quarterback play and you didn't get it. Whether it was Tim Boyle, Zach Wilson, the mess that the Jets are in this offseason and trying to fix some of these things and the anonymous sources coming left and right. That's a highlight of the dysfunction that is brought forth by ownership. 30 sources wanted to talk to The Athletic about why the Jets struggled in 2023. 30. You can't tell me that with all the issues the Jets had, for Woody Johnson to come out and say that it was only about the backup quarterback, that's not the point. Quite frankly, I agreed with everything Woody Johnson said up until that point, and I completely tuned it out. Because I said everything he was talking about, win now, focusing on 2024, it's a playoff mandate, even though we wouldn't acknowledge it. All of that went by the wayside to me because you didn't have to go that far. You didn't have to blame Zach Wilson for everything. We all know he's a deficient quarterback. We all know he's probably not going to be in the NFL for very much longer if he doesn't get a good quarterback coach to help him. He's got a very, very quick future ahead of him in the National Football League if he does not get a guy who has done this before with quarterbacks. We know this. What's the reason? Why is Woody even mentioning him in the first place? He doesn't have to say anything. If he's asked about Zach Wilson, which reporters are absolutely allowed to do, and it's fair game for them to ask, the question is, okay, Zach Wilson, you guys going to address the backup quarterback role? He doesn't have to say, well, we didn't have a backup last year. He could simply say, yes, I think it's one thing we're going to focus on. We've got a lot of different focuses. We want to make sure we have someone competent enough behind Aaron Rodgers, and we want to make sure we get a top receiver and solidify the offensive line. There are so many different professional ways to handle it that Woody Johnson just didn't do. And it makes him look bad. It makes the entire franchise look bad. There's no need to throw comments out there. I agreed with everything he said. Everything he said up until that point. Because there was no reason for him to go that far talking about Zach Wilson. Get to some of your comments. John, taking a shot at Wilson, no, from Woody doesn't mean much. Zach is well out the door. Talk is cheap. Action means everything. Next man up. Yeah, listen, I get this. And this is kind of my point. He's out the door. He's gone. Why even make a comment in the first place? He's talking, well, he's like, well, we had a lot of backup quarterbacks. I wasn't just talking about Zach, but Zach was the one that played most of the year. You're essentially taking a shot at him because he was benched in November. There was no reason for this. No reason whatsoever. John B., that Corey Davis news early was a curveball dependent on Lazard, and he shit the bed. Listen, Lazard had a terrible first year in New York. He had a terrible, terrible year. But how much of things change if they had a competent receiver outside of Garrett Wilson with Lazard? I think Lazard is a number 3 wide receiver. I think that's pretty much his best overall spot. He's the 3rd receiver. And you need a number 2 with him to sort of alleviate some of that pressure. And I think he got in his head a little bit. The Jets got in his head a little bit. The fan base got in his head a little bit. Everyone was just frustrated with his lack of numbers. And I know he was too. Lazard was not happy about the way he performed. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he didn't get a lot of work with Zach Wilson. He got most of his work with Aaron Rodgers. This is really the first time that he played with any other quarterback besides Aaron Rodgers. So I'm willing to give him another year. Kind of like I said before, Carlos Beltran with the Mets had a terrible first year with the team. Terrible first year. But then came out, was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. I think that's a fair comparison, if you will. I think that's a fair comparison. Let's see what happens in year 2, because this is it for him. They can get out of the contract after this season. But to not do anything after Davis retired, that's a problem. And that goes back to the front office. Again, you guys are looking at me, and you guys can look at me and say, well, Nick's all over the place because he's pointing fingers at everyone. Yes, that's the point. The point of the Jets' terrible season last year and falling flat on their face with expectations wasn't that the team had 1 or 2 things go wrong for them. Everything went wrong for them. Everyone deserves blame for this. It's not just Woody. It's not just Douglas. It's not just Saleh. It's not just Zach. Every player this season had instances where they did not perform to their level. Even Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson is their best offensive player, and I think he's better than Breece Hall. Fair to say. He had moments this year where he kind of struggled with catching the football, with getting open. And he still put up 95 catches. That's how good he is. That's how good he is. And I'm not going to throw Garrett Wilson and say he's the reason why the Jets stunk this year. That's not what I'm saying. But every player deserves blame. Every person in that organization deserves blame for missing the playoffs for a 13th straight year, even with Aaron Rodgers going down. Everyone. It's not just one. It's not just the other. It's everyone. Everyone deserves some blame for this. Another comment from John B. No accountability. The Jets continue to play this narrative that no one is to blame. Let's mutually depart with everyone. Douglas should have been the one to bring in that missing piece backup quarterback. Yeah, again, I think, and again, it goes back to Josina Anderson's reporting. If you believe Josina's reporting, which, like I say, there's no reason not to believe what she is saying. She's very plugged in. If Woody Johnson didn't want to spend money on the backup quarterback, that absolves Douglas of the second issue. The first issue is he didn't address Corey Davis's retirement. That's the first issue. The second issue is backup quarterback. And the third issue is the offensive line. They signed Rodgers Saffold at the trade deadline when they were 4-3. They didn't want to spend too many resources on the offensive line or in the trade market. But they needed somebody. So they ignored it and watched their season wither away because they didn't make a move. Joe Douglas still deserves blame, but Woody Johnson needs to be held accountable as well. Because based on her reporting, he's the reason why the Jets didn't go and get a backup quarterback. There's every team that's gone through this. Bobby Trees, looking through it, Chargers, Raiders, etc. Feel bad. Shat on his grave. Yeah, I didn't like his comments. I didn't like his comments regarding Zach Wilson. I thought, and I say this again, I said this early on in the show, I agreed with everything he said up until that point. And when he said it, it completely took me out of the conversation. Completely took me out. Because we knew this. We've been saying it all year. They just didn't want to spend too much money. They already spending the second most money on a roster this year. That's on Woody Johnson. That's not on Joe Douglas. That's not on Robert Saleh. That's on Woody Johnson. And I think to a point, if we use our investigative powers and we infer sort of different examples and different pieces of evidence throughout this year, we can understand why Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas are back. And it's Woody Johnson and his fault, really. He essentially is saying, by saying we need a backup quarterback, I truly believe he is saying, I know I'm the one that told our group not to go after a competent backup because we didn't want to spend more money. I'm the one that said that. So I will take the blame for that, knowing full well the backup quarterback was a key reason why we missed the playoffs. So I am giving my guys, I'm giving the GM, I'm giving the head coach another shot. I'm going to let them see how well they can go with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback with everything at their disposal. Everything. I think that was part of Woody's comment with the backup quarterback. It wasn't just crapping all over Zach Wilson and his legacy in New York, which has now been hit with the hammer and sort of just thrown out the door Tom and Jerry style. This was more Woody Johnson understanding part of the reason why they struggled was his fault and his inability and lack of necessity to allow his team to do whatever is necessary to get a winner out of the 2023 club. And that's why they're back. Think of it this way. If he allowed Douglas to address the backup quarterback position and the Jets finished 9-8 and they miss the playoffs, they still miss it. I think the conversation is different because what he says, listen, I gave them all the resources they needed. They finished 9-8. They've improved. So we know we have some semblance of competency here. Let's see how far they can go with Aaron Rodgers. The angle of how Woody Johnson talks to the media is different if they finish 9-8, if he allows his coaching staff to go all in like he should have. So I think accountability is there. I think more so Woody just understands you need to give guys a chance to actually succeed with the players that they want and the players they need in their system. Aaron Rodgers, Elijah Vera Tucker, offensive line help with competent left tackles and right tackles. That's all coming this offseason. There's absolutely no way in hell the Jets are going to walk into the offseason, walk into OTAs with Dwayne Brown and Mekhi Becton as their tackles again. There's no way it's going to happen. They are addressing the position. They're going to address the position a lot this offseason. So those fixes are coming. And it's good that Woody Johnson spoke because there are some owners that haven't. There are some owners that have not spoken to the media and have shown accountability with the team that they have hired. Jeffrey Lurie comes to mind. Jeffrey Lurie hasn't spoken about the Eagles' collapse. He hasn't. And he deserves some blame for that as well. The Eagles have made transformational changes on their coaching staff, clearly pushed by Lurie. But Lurie didn't do what Woody Johnson did. Woody Johnson spoke to the media and said what he said. And I disagree with the one piece about putting Zach Wilson on blast. But most of the stuff everyone agreed with. No one was surprised by it. Lurie hasn't spoken. So there's some appreciation I think Jets should have that their owner maybe didn't speak right away as you try to maintain and cool off. Have the professionalism to speak when you are ready to talk. I think there's some merit to that. We heard that with A.J. Brown this year, where it was, listen, I'm pissed off. We're losing. I'd rather not speak. Let me cool myself off. That happens, and that's perfectly fine. These guys are human. Everyone understands that. Woody Johnson speaking, not the problem. Not the problem at all. His comments towards Zach Wilson, little overkill. Little overkill. At least to me. Because there were so many ways he could handle it, and he didn't handle it very well. And I will stand by that for a very long time. It's better to act like Robert Saleh in those instances and say, hey, we appreciate everything he did. Just didn't work out. We're going to move on and try to get another backup quarterback. That's all he had to say. All he has to say. And it would look totally different. All right, I'm going to be staying on for another 9-10 minutes or so. And I do want to address one thing because some people disagreed with me last night. Others did agree with me. NFL Honors Night was last night. Woody Johnson obviously spoke, dug into that for the last half hour. But we also had some of the awards. Lamar Jackson, NFL MVP. Cam Hayward, Walter Payton Man of the Year. I thought for the most part, the honors committee, the voters, got everything right. I thought the one egregious one was Jalen Carter not winning Defensive Rookie of the Year. But even then, I understood it. Because Carter, as great a start as he had, he kind of trailed off at the end of the year because he was just playing so much. He was exhausted. Sean Desai, Matt Patricia, they're all out for a reason. And I think Carter's still going to have a great career. Will Anderson's still going to have a great career. But how about the Houston Texans doing what the Jets did last year? Offensive and defensive Rookie of the Year on the same team. Highly impressive. The Jets did it, and they didn't even have a quarterback. They didn't draft a quarterback. The Texans, you kind of get the easy road because it's the quarterback and the pass rusher, the high-value guys, the guys that, hey, sacks are a major stat. Touchdowns and wins are a major stat. The Texans won the division. They absolutely deserve to be in this conversation. The Jets went 7-10 last year. But because Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson was so incredible for a bad team, they got those honors. I think that's more impressive than what Houston did. Houston made the playoffs. They're expected. They're expected to win those awards. The Jets went 7-10 and still got it. Very impressive. Outside of that, I know you Jet fans are upset about Breece Hall not getting comeback player of the year. I didn't have him on my vote. I think I had him placing, second or third. I had him as a finalist. And I thought not having him as a finalist was a mistake, but I still thought Joe Flacco was the guy. And people will look at, well, comeback from an injury is the only way to describe it. No, there's many different ways to come back, to be up for the award. Joe Flacco has been irrelevant for the better part of the last 8 years. He was benched and removed by the team he won Super Bowl MVP for. And he's been bouncing around ever since. He was in Philly. He was with the Jets. He goes to Cleveland with a team that's in disarray. They had just lost Deshaun Watson. The quarterback issues were all over the place. And there was some real consideration that Kevin Stefanski was going to be fired. There was some real consideration earlier that year, even midway through, when they were hovering around playoff contention and just barely hanging on, that Cleveland was considering a change at head coach. And Joe Flacco, the guy who hasn't been relevant for 8 years, steps up and leads the Browns to the playoffs. It's kind of like this. The Houston Texans deserve to have Coach of the Year. They deserve to have it. In any other year, DeMeco Ryans wins that award because it's the Texans. There's a certain bravado, there's a certain aura of these losing teams that when they finally get there, they need to be given their flowers. The Browns, the Lions, the Jets are one of those teams. If the Jets make the playoffs next year, I think there's a good chance that Robert Saleh wins Coach of the Year. Even if they get in at like 11-7, 12-5, whatever it is. I think there's consideration to have Robert Saleh be Coach of the Year. because it's the Jets and they haven't made the playoffs in 13 years, and you are ending a degree of awfulness. The Lions had it. The Texans have it. The Browns have it. Bad teams that have been bad for so long, when they finally get a chance to do well, you give them their flowers. And the only reason why DeMeco Ryans didn't win Coach of the Year in the closest vote of all time for that award, the only reason why he didn't win it is because Stefanski literally got Joe Flacco to be the comeback player of the year. Highly impressive from both sides. And Flacco threw a lot of interceptions, and he looked awful late in the playoff loss against the Houston Texans. But it's still Joe Flacco. For 5 weeks, it was Super Bowl MVP style Joe Flacco. That was impressive. There's no other way to put it. It was impressive. So I do think that the honors committee got it right. I do think they got it right because Breece Hall was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Being able to come back from an ACL injury and put up the second most yards from scrimmage out of any running back is highly impressive. I just don't think it was bigger than Joe Flacco's reemergence. It's just how it is. I'm trying to go through the list here to get to the Hall of Fame because I want to go through the entire list as well, because this is what I want to end on. The Hall of Fame is probably the biggest sham now that it's ever been. I thought it was the case when Kurt Warner got in. It's going to be the case when Eli Manning gets in. Major League Baseball's Hall of Fame is a mess. A mess. And at least in the NBA, they kind of bring everyone in. Everyone's a Hall of Famer. The NBA is just, yep. Everyone's a Hall of Famer. Come on. You play for a long time? Yep, Hall of Famer. The NFL Hall of Fame is becoming a ludicrous thing because, and I'm going to go through the list, and I will give you my opinion on who I think, if it's right or wrong. Steve McMichael, part of the senior class. I agree with. I have no problem with the senior class bringing in McMichael. He was a key part of that Bears roster. Randy Gradishar, completely agree as well. Denver Orange Crush, awesome. Julius Peppers, absolutely. Was Julius Peppers in his heyday a top 5 defensive player? I certainly think so. He was up for that award many times. Absolutely. And the longevity as well to include that, fantastic resume. Over 100 sacks, easy. 100% yes. Dwight Freeney. Is Dwight Freeney worthy of being a Hall of Famer? I certainly think so. Super Bowl champion, ton of sacks, ton of Pro Bowls and All Pros. Certainly top 5 for his position as well. Andre Johnson. I thought if there's a Houston Texan that deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, it's Andre Johnson. And he's really the only one up until this point. As an overall player, I know Cushing was really good. DeMeco was really good. But is it enough? No, it wasn't enough. I don't think those guys were. I think Andre Johnson, he is the greatest Texan ever. And he absolutely is deserving of the Hall of Fame. One comment here that I completely agree with from Lake Jeff fan. Feeney's known for the spin move, so yes, I completely agree. If you trademark a specific move, change the game in a certain way, absolutely. And I'm going to get to one of those people in a minute. Mentioned Freeney. We mentioned Johnson, Peppers, Gradishar, McMichael, Patrick Willis. I'm going to tell you right now, guys, I agree with Patrick Willis to be in the Hall of Fame. This isn't his first year of eligibility. He deserves to be in the Hall of Fame for as little time as he played in the NFL. What was it, 8 years? He was a top 3 linebacker in the NFL. Top 3. One of the best at his position. For as long as he is deserving of the NFL Hall of Fame. But this goes to my next point. Is Devin Hester deserving of a Hall of Fame nomination this year? I'm going to tell you no. Not to say that he's not a Hall of Famer in the future, because I think he will and probably should eventually get in. But wasn't this his first or second year on the ballot? You know who else was on the ballot this year that got absolutely snubbed? Antonio Gates, Reggie Wayne. Two players that throughout their playing career were in the top 5 of their position. Antonio Gates, people will argue about Tony Gonzalez and his impact in the league and his overall prowess at the tight end position. There are some people that think Antonio Gates was a better tight end, had more touchdowns than Antonio Gonzalez. Antonio Gates was really, really fucking good. Damn good. Probably, arguably, the best tight end of his era. Whether you put him or Tony Gonzalez in there, irrelevant. One of the top 2 players of their position for a decade. And Devin Hester gets in over him? How about Reggie Wayne? The argument against Reggie Wayne is essentially he played with Peyton and he played with Marvin Harrison, so his numbers were always going to be pretty big. That's the only argument you have against Reggie Wayne. And it's such a stupid argument. It's such a stupid, stupid argument. John Stallworth was the leading receiver of Pittsburgh for a very long time. Everyone knew Lynn Swann, though, more. Because Swann was the Super Bowl MVP. He made those acrobatic catches. So, should one of them been held back because of the other? It's an absurd argument. Reggie Wayne and Antonio Gates absolutely deserve to be in Hall of Fame consideration, and they should go before Devin Hester. Well, Nick, he's the greatest returner of all time. You have to get him in. Right. He will go in. But kick returner and tight end, which position has more impact on an NFL game? I'll even extend it further. Who was the top receiver for those San Diego Chargers with Antonio Gates? Chris Chambers? Vincent Jackson came on later, so maybe him? The Bears didn't have a quarterback, but they had a great defense and they had good receivers. Devin Hester is going into the Hall of Fame not as a receiver, as a kickoff and punt returner. You tell me, please explain to me how a tight end who was the number 1 receiving option on his team and the number 1 tight end of his era gets blocked from the Hall of Fame because of a kick returner. I'm not talking about Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback of all time. If the greatest quarterback of all time is the reason why Antonio Gates doesn't get in, of course we all understand. Of course we do. Devin Hester getting in over Antonio Gates is one of the biggest shams I've ever seen in NFL Hall of Fame conversations. I'm stunned at how ridiculous it got with this. Is he the greatest kick returner of all time? Yes. Are we going to value kick returners in the same way as tight ends, receivers, and running backs? No. I'm never going to do that. It would be such a stupid argument. It would be such a stupid argument. Because before Devin Hester was Dante Hall. Are we going to put Dante Hall in the Hall of Fame? He's the second best kick returner of all time. Oh, but Deion Sanders was there. Primetime was a kick returner. He was such a weapon. Yeah, because he was the best corner of his era. Speaking of which, you want to talk about snubs. Eric Allen, cornerback, Philadelphia, the Raiders. It's a shame that he hasn't gotten in. Look at Eric Allen's numbers. Look at his numbers. And tell me he's not deserving of the Hall of Fame. He was a better Asante Samuel than Asante Samuel could ever dream of. He was the first true ball hawking corner. Deion was a coverage guy. When he got the ball, he could take it to the house. But he was a lockdown guy. Eric Allen was the first ball hawk. For him not to be in the Hall of Fame, sham. Devin Hester over Antonio Gates, sham. And don't get me started about next year. You want to talk about Hall of Fame players. These are the guys that are up. I'm taking this list exactly from Adam Schefter. Tell me who's in the Hall of Fame from here. Cameron Wake. No. Darren Sproles. No. Vernon Davis. Good, but no. Aqib Talib. No. Demaryius Thomas. Rest in peace. No. Joe Staley. I think Staley could get in. Earl Thomas. I think there's a conversation for Earl Thomas. Marshawn Lynch. No. Marshall Yonda. Maybe in a year or two after. Terrell Suggs. Yes. Vinatieri. Yes, but not in his first year. Luke Kuechly. Same kind of argument with Patrick Willis. I think he gets in, but he shouldn't get in first round, first ballot. And then the number one name on this list, who I am going to continuously bombard you all with comments saying this is a sham of a Hall of Fame. Eli Manning. Does he have the 2 Super Bowls? Yes. You know who else has 2 Super Bowls as a starting quarterback and pulled off upsets in both games? Jim Plunkett. Look how eerily similar Eli Manning and Jim Plunkett are. You want to talk about similar career paths? Look at them. Just do me a favor and look at their careers. Plunkett led the league in interceptions. Eli Manning led the league in interceptions 3 times. Eli Manning threw for a boatload of yards because he played for a very long time. He got to the playoffs and won the Super Bowl twice. Look what happened every other year. You want to know why I put Ben Roethlisberger as a Hall of Famer easily over a guy like Manning? Because Ben Roethlisberger has excellent playoff moments outside of his 2 Super Bowl wins. He got to a 3rd Super Bowl in 2010. He got to an AFC Championship game in 2016. He's been to the playoffs consistently. He won in the playoffs consistently. Every year, it seemed that Pittsburgh was either in the playoffs, winning a playoff game, and getting bounced out or otherwise. Eli Manning, look at his resume. He's got the 2 Super Bowl wins. He's got the 2 Super Bowl MVPs. 2005, what happened? Well, they got bounced out in the first round. 2006, what happened? He lost to Jeff Garcia. 2008, arguably the best Giants team of his era. They didn't even win the Super Bowl. They didn't even win a playoff game, and they lost to Donovan McNabb. Didn't make the playoffs in 2009. Didn't make the playoffs in 2010. Win the Super Bowl in 2011. What happens in 2012? They miss the playoffs. 13, 14, miss the playoffs. How about 15? Miss the playoffs. Gets to the playoffs in 16 and loses in the first round. This isn't a Hall of Fame resume. This is a Hall of very good player. Eli Manning is a good player. He is not Hall of Fame worthy. The only Manning that has been Hall of Fame worthy is Peyton. Because he was the top 5 of his position for his era. Was there ever a consideration of Eli Manning being a top 5 player at his position? There were arguments to put him in the top 15, not the top 5. It's absurd. I'm going to bring this up because I see this comment. I love it. You showing your Eagles fan bias. You think McNabb deserves to go in. If Eli Manning is going into the Hall of Fame, for 2 playoff rounds, then the guy who has more playoff wins than him deserves to get in. Do I think McNabb deserves to get in on his merit? Probably not. I think he's a consideration for the Old Timers Award later on in the future when the older crew picks. I think then he'll get in. That's the rightful thing. I think Ken Anderson deserves to get in on an Old Timers Award. What is Eli? Eli's won 2 Super Bowls. So did Jim Plunkett. So Jim Plunkett won an MVP. Won 2 Super Bowls in which he was the underdog in both games. And he didn't even have remotely close to the defense that the defensive line for the Giants possessed. It's a sham when he gets in. And we all know he's getting in because of name, because of recognition, and because of the ESPN contract. Under no circumstances is there anything on Eli's resume outside of the 2 Super Bowls that he actually deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. None at all. You beat Tom Brady twice. Congratulations. You know who else beat Tom Brady? Nick Foles. And that was a game that Brady actually played well in. Eli Manning wasn't the one that was sacking Tom Brady in Super Bowl 42. He wasn't the guy sacking everybody. Look at the Super Bowl numbers. The Super Bowl numbers don't scream a guy that wins MVP. But he won MVP because he was the quarterback that did it. In reality, it should have gone to someone like Strahan or someone like Justin Tuck, who were just so dominant in that game. Don't tell me that Eli Manning deserves to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. If he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, it becomes the biggest sham. I don't think Kurt Warner deserves to get in. He has a Super Bowl, 2 NFL MVPs. I think he was in the Hall of Very Good, but the 8 years that it took him to be relevant again should count against him. The Hall of Fame should be about the best of the best from their era. Most of this list is. The argument for Devin Hester, I get it. Greatest kick returner of all time. First ballot? Absolutely not. Ahead of Antonio Gates? Absolutely not. It's just the case. Starting to sound like Lombardi trashing the Jets yesterday, but showing his love for Patriots. Listen, I'm not a Patriots fan. And I am an Eagles fan. So, yes, my judgment is based off of what my team did to Eli Manning. Eli Manning against his biggest rival. 0-2 in the playoffs. Losing record. More interceptions than touchdowns. That should count. That's part of a resume. He didn't really play that well. When the Giants got in because the NFCs killed each other, what do you want? Manning doesn't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, and it's going to be laughable when he goes first ballot because his brother got it. It's essentially what it is. It's a sham. It's an absolute sham, and it's going to taint the Hall of Fame for a long time. A long time. All right, I've been on for an hour. I wanted to get this done in 45 minutes. However, appreciate you guys jumping on, talking about Woody Johnson and the NFL Hall of Fame. Appreciate you guys listening to my rambling as well in terms of Eli Manning. Let me know what you guys think about the show, what improvements should be made as well. All those will be taken into consideration. I hope to see you guys on Monday when we dissect Super Bowl 58. And also very quick, my prediction, Chiefs win. See you guys on Monday.